Cheryl is an integrative health author and a natural medicine practitioner. She has been a frequent presenter on the Terry Talks Nutrition educational webinar series, and she is also a nationally recognized speaker interviewed by prestigious publications including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Prevention Magazine. Cheryl is a well-known advocate of bridging the worlds of mainstream and natural medicine to achieve optimal health outcomes. With a degree in psychology and 10 years experience in psychiatric care, Cheryl is a natural fit for today's topic, and we're all looking forward to hearing her thoughts on natural interventions for mental health. So thank you very much, Cheryl, and welcome to Terry Talks Nutrition.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy day to learn more about ways that we can use natural medicines in order to help people feel their best. You know, that psychiatric care is a subject that is near and dear to my heart because I believe that it is actually in many ways sometimes more devastating than a physical illness. So I'm glad to be able to talk to you today about some natural interventions that can make a real difference in people's lives. So let's get started. You know, 1 in 5 U.S. adults will experience mental illness. Half of them will experience symptoms that are severe enough to warrant treatment by a healthcare professional, and 1 in 25 people live with a serious mental illness. When I worked in psychiatric care, I worked 5 years on inpatient care and 5 years in community support, which are individuals with chronic mental illnesses trying to acclimate and accommodate back into the community sometimes after a lengthy hospitalization. And I believe that these people are very vulnerable and that they have a lot of struggles, many of them invisible, that deserve our help and our compassion. The 2 most common mental illnesses are anxiety and depression, and we use these words flippantly a lot, don't we? Oh my God, I've got so much anxiety when you're stressed out over Christmas holidays and you maybe don't have all of your shopping done, or oh my God, I'm so depressed, my car had a flat tire, or I'm so depressed. So we use these words to mean sadness and, you know, kind of like stress. But in truth, when you have generalized anxiety disorder, every single day is a struggle. You often feel overwhelmed. You have an impending sense of dread. A lot of people with anxiety disorders have excessive worry. They cannot stop worrying. Now, worrying is a healthy thing. You should worry about going out into a dangerous neighborhood after dark. That worry should make you think twice before you attempt such a venture. But excessive worry is worrying when it is not useful at all. There's nothing you can do about it, or worrying about things that may never be. Another type of mental illness that falls under the umbrella of the anxiety disorders are obsessive-compulsive disorder. And this is often characterized in the media by people who wash their hands, and some of they wash their hands frequently, or they have rituals that they have to complete. But obsessive-compulsive disorder can take the form of a lot of different types of mental dysfunction, including hoarding, germ phobias, hypochondria. There's just a whole list that goes on. And then post-traumatic stress disorder, very often when we talk about this, we are thinking about people that have served in the armed forces, soldiers who have been through difficult situations that have trouble letting go of those memories. And we'll talk more about PTSD later. But in truth, anyone who has been the victim of a violent crime or who has had a significant traumatic event in their life may well have post-traumatic stress disorder, which means that your body has not and your brain has not gone through the normal forgetting process. And the memories of the trauma are as vivid and as emotionally powerful years later than perhaps they were when the event originally occurred. Now, depression is usually divided into major and minor depression. Depression can be poor mood, dysphoria, they call that, where you just don't feel your best every day. You have trouble having joy, but you're still able to work and you're still able to function. There's just not much spark in your life. But major depressive disorders are extremely difficult because they can get in the way of work, school, relationships, family, children. I've seen patients with major depressive disorder that were so depressed that they could not even get out of bed, that they were completely bedridden. There's also some hormonal fluctuations conditions that can make women more prone to postpartum depression. There's seasonal affective disorder, bipolar disorder, which they used to call manic depressive disorder, where individuals go back and forth between very high highs and very low lows. So just looking at even these two categories of mental illness, you can see what a variety of forms mental dysfunction can take. When we look at anxiety, 18% of Americans are affected by anxiety every year. And as I said, this isn't just stress because maybe the paycheck is a day late. These are major anxiety disorders that people are struggling with. There's almost 50 million Xanax prescriptions written annually. Xanax, the generic of which is called alprazolam, is an anti-anxiety drug. It has addiction potential. It has some terrible withdrawal symptoms, but it does relax you. Nearly half of the people diagnosed with depression will also have an anxiety disorder, so those poor souls are dealing with both. Unfortunately, there is a dementia link. When researchers looked at the health records of over 40,000 people with dementia and compared them to what types of drugs were they using prior to developing dementia, they found that they compared these people and their drug history to another 280,000 people who did not develop dementia. What they found is that daily use for a year or more of anticholinergic drugs increases the risk of dementia by 30%. And there's over 100 different types of anticholinergic drugs, and many of them are anti-anxiety drugs. This was true even if the use of the anticholinergics had occurred like 20 years before. So maybe a person gets Alzheimer's disease at 79, maybe they were in their 50s when they went on Xanax for a couple of years because they were so anxious they were just miserable. Anticholinergics block acetylcholine. Now, it makes sense, doesn't it? Anticholinergic. Anti means against. So it blocks the activity of choline in the body, and choline is required for acetylcholine, which is a major neurotransmitter in the brain that is known to be significantly lower in people who have Alzheimer's disease. A recent study also linked the use of benzodiazepines, Xanax, and Valium for 3 months or more, to increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease by 51%. I think these are unacceptable. I think we have to do a better job in helping people have good quality of life without these excessive risks. A new government survey reports that the use of antidepressants has increased 65% since 1999. And they did another comparative study where they looked at data from 14,000 Americans to prior health surveys from 1999. 1 in every 8 Americans over the age of 12 has used an antidepressant in the last month. So if you are in an elevator with 8 people, 1 of those individuals has used an antidepressant in the last month. Women are twice as likely as men to use an antidepressant. Long-term use is very common. 25% of people who reported antidepressant use in the last month had been taking the drug, this is going to surprise you, had been taking the drug for 10 years or more. So for very many individuals, once they start on these medications, the doctors are never taking them off again. Or the individuals are afraid if they go off their medications, all of their really troubling symptoms will return. Anxiety and depression are really common. The conventional drugs used to treat these illnesses have significant side effects, including an increased risk of dementia. In addition to that, some of the side effects are drowsiness, dizziness, insomnia, poor balance, problems with coordination, trouble speaking, having slurred speech, difficulty concentrating, and irritability, sometimes even anger. They also cause diarrhea, sweating, headache, nausea, blurred vision, and appetite changes. And depression drugs, a lot of what they call the serotonin, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, also can interfere with the ability to have an orgasm and have normal sexual drive, and it can really dampen libido. So these are some pretty dramatic side effects that people don't want to deal with. Now that said, I'm not saying that we shouldn't treat anxiety and depression. Depression can be a life-threatening disease. It is a life-threatening disease. It has a high mortality rate because people who are profoundly depressed, and sometimes people who are profoundly anxious, don't want to deal with their symptoms any longer and choose to commit suicide. So I'm not saying at all that we should take these diseases lightly, and I would never tell anyone if they are currently on medication to throw those drugs out the window and try something natural. I would say work with an integrative healthcare practitioner, or if your doctor is open to it, work with your doctor for transitioning and to try some other more natural things that might have greater impact on your underlying problem and also help you avoid excessive use of some of the drugs that can have some pretty profound side effects. So let's look at some of the key factors that lead to brain disruption. Now, first I have to say that there are physical factors. It's sad that in 2018 we still have to say this. But so many people still believe that mental disorders are something you should be able to change by sheer force of will. So if you break your leg, nobody says, you know, if you tried hard enough, you could fix that leg. If you tried hard enough, that leg would mend. Why don't you just think about walking? Why can't you walk? Nobody would do that. They say, my gosh, your leg is broken. You have to either give it time to heal or you have to have some kind of medical care to facilitate the healing. What happens in the brain is that there is an actual physical dysfunction that you cannot change just by having a better mental attitude. How many times have people with anxiety been told, just relax, quit worrying about that, don't be such a nervous Nelly? How many people with depression have told you, just get out and do stuff, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, have a positive mental attitude, quit being such a gloomy Gus? So I know that people are not meaning to be cruel, but those are some pretty cruel things to say to people that are suffering from these disorders. Do you think that they would choose to have a crippling anxiety or depression if there was some way that they didn't have to endure this extreme unpleasantness? So we have to look at what happens physically that sets people up for changes in their thinking behavior, because that's what it is. A broken leg changes your walking behavior. Problems in the brain change your thinking, change your mood, and change your activities. So let's look at some of those things that happen that can leave us vulnerable to both anxiety and depression disorders. The first is inflammation. When you have high levels of inflammation in the brain and oxidative stress, but let's focus on inflammation for a moment, that contributes to the origins of many mental illnesses. 40% of patients with psoriasis, which is an inflammatory skin disorder, scored positively for depressed mood. 27% were diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and these are scores that are much higher than the generalized population. So when people have an ongoing chronic inflammatory disease, they tend to have ongoing chronic inflammation throughout the body and are much more at risk for inflammation in the brain that leads to depression. Inflammatory C-reactive protein was 70% higher in adolescent girls with depression versus girls who were not experiencing depression. Inflammation has also been linked to anxiety, bipolar disorder, and even schizophrenia. So why are we experiencing all this inflammation? Well, a lot of it has to do with the foods that we eat and the lifestyle that we enjoy and the problems with some of the chemicals in the environment to which we're exposed. I often say we're living in the middle of a great big science experiment. Nobody in the history of humankind has lived in an environment with so many inflammatory triggers. Everything from our high fructose corn syrup to the glyphosate that's residual in our food, from agricultural practices that are damaging to our health, to sedentary lifestyles so people don't get up and get moving. The list goes on and on. So high levels of inflammation, sometimes not necessarily painful inflammation. You can have chronic high levels of inflammation in the body without experiencing pain, and all of these can lead to changes in the brain that set you up for mental disorder. Another problem has to do with the endocannabinoid system. Now, our body has a sophisticated network of receptors called the endocannabinoid system. And I'm sure that you may have heard of the endocannabinoid system before. However, research into this system in the body is relatively recent because prior to this, research on the endocannabinoid system was stigmatized because it was discovered by researchers looking to figure out how marijuana made people's thinking change. They were looking at what are the compounds in marijuana that make people high and how does it do it. So when they discovered this complex system, they named it after the plant. They called it the endocannabinoid system. Unfortunately, with a lot of politicians demonizing marijuana, and a lot of the social prejudice against marijuana, because the system of receptors was called the endocannabinoid system, we saw research dwindle ridiculously when this is one of the most major systems that have been discovered in the last 100 years that play a role in how our body functions and how our thinking works. So throughout your body, there's a series of receptors, and their CB1 and CB2 receptors are the main players in the endocannabinoid system. And when something connects to them or flips their switches, a certain change is elicited within the body. So it may be in your gut. There's cannabinoid receptors in your gut. And if you, let's say you have a lot of hypermotility, you know, that things are digesting too quickly, attachment to some of the cannabinoid receptors that help regulate gut peristalsis may help to slow that process down. So it's a great communication tool within the body, and it's a great way for the body to help maintain homeostasis. Now, a lot of people say CB1 receptors are in the brain and CB2 receptors are in the immune system and the central nervous system. This is not exactly true. This is just for simplification purposes. They're really both everywhere, but it is true that there's a predominance of CB1 receptors in the brain. There's also CB2 receptors tend to be more dominant outside the brain, but there's a lot of crossover. They play a role in mood, metabolism, energy, memory, immune system function, and the perception of pain, and the neurological response to pain. Endocannabinoids are naturally produced in the body to act on the endocannabinoid system. So you got this system of receptors. So if you've got, you know, if you've got thousands of bus stops in your body, right, you need to have buses. So the buses that are stopping at these bus stops are called our endocannabinoids. And the two most researched are called anandamide and 2-AG. Now, anandamide was named after the Sanskrit word for bliss or joy, ananda, because it's sort of self-explanatory. Anandamide elicits a feeling of delight and bliss and relaxation and happiness. 2-AG works on the thinking and mood system as well, but also other parts of the body. So between these two, these are utilized by the body to attach to cannabinoid receptors. For a lot of individuals, a growing number of individuals, we do not have enough endocannabinoid production. We're not making enough of the compounds that help protect us from pain, that work with our immune system to help protect us from cancer, that work with our brain to help protect us from depression and anxiety. It's just amazing to me that we are finding so many chronic illnesses associated with a depletion of endocannabinoids. In fact, it's just amazing that the science is starting to turn that around to see how putting plant cannabinoids back in the body can make a huge difference in health. For HIV patients who were using cannabis to put more cannabinoids in their system, 94% experienced muscle pain relief. 93% had reduced anxiety. 86% saw a significant improvement in depression. So this is a system that researchers are going to continue to explore to better develop ways in which we can use plant cannabinoids in order to help supplement our dwindling supplies within our body to get the types of reactions that we need, the physical health and the mental health aspects. So anandamide, that bliss molecule, is correlated with mood and mental function. In 53 children with autism versus 53 control children, for each twofold increase in anandamide level, so the more anandamide these children naturally had on board, the risk for autism was decreased fourfold. Fourfold. That's 400%. When you look at these two plasma concentrations of anandamide, look at the huge difference between the children with autism versus the children without autism. So it may well be that because we are living in a world that really challenges the ability of our bodies to make endocannabinoids and challenges the ability of those endocannabinoids to attach to the proper receptors, that might be part of the explanation of what's going on with autism and autism spectrum disorder. I don't believe it's the only thing. I do believe it's a significant piece of the puzzle. So individuals are turning to cannabis sativa as a very rich source of plant cannabinoids to help to augment the amounts that are already in the body. And hemp, industrial hemp, is a very rich source of these plant cannabinoids called phytocannabinoids. In fact, there's no plant that they've discovered that has more different kinds of plant cannabinoids than does hemp. The best known are THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. That's what gets you high in marijuana. And the other one that has risen to prominence is cannabidiol, or CBD. These are two of over 100. It says 80 to 100. This slide is already out of date. The most recent estimates are more than 120 different plant cannabinoids in hemp, including things like cannabichromene, cannabidiphrin, cannabidiolic acid, cannabigerol. These are all plant cannabinoids that play different roles within the body. Some of them are applicable to mental health. Each has its own unique activity. But when I'm talking to consumers or to my patients, I have to differentiate hemp from marijuana. When marijuana is cultivated, people who are growing marijuana want more THC because people want to use the marijuana to have that mental alteration, that high. So medical marijuana or regular marijuana is grown to be short and very leafy because the highest concentration in the marijuana plant is in the leaves. Industrial hemp that's grown for everything from from animal feed to fabric design to building materials to biofuels. They're focusing more on the stalk because the stalk has all of those fibers that are so useful industrially, and the stalk is also really rich in cannabidiol, or CBD. So they actually, the plants, even though they're both cannabis sativa, they look somewhat different because of how they're being grown in order to achieve certain goals. So when we look at marijuana, up to 20% of marijuana is THC. Industrial hemp, by legal definition, may not contain more than 0.3% THC. So there's a little bit there that's naturally occurring, but it can be sold legally by law if it's 0.3% or under. It cannot be over that. So when people say that cannabis sativa is all the same thing, nothing could be further from the truth because there's some very different concentrations of certain constituents. Now, when we look at using hemp oil and cannabidiol, CBD, for medical applications, we extract it from the stalk because that's the lowest, the highest in CBD and the lowest in THC, so that we can guarantee absolutely that you need to guarantee absolutely that you're meeting all the federal guidelines in order to use this. But they are not the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that marijuana and medical marijuana are without merit when it comes to treating different disorders. But if you're not living in a state where that's legal, you know, this is still an illegal drug in many states, and I believe that a lot of the research looking at instead using the CBD is very beneficial for a wide variety of mental health concerns. I don't want you to be confused, though, because I've seen hemp seeds on the internet, or hemp seed protein, or hemp seed oil. The seeds have good fatty acids, so it's healthy, but it doesn't contain any of the plant cannabinoids. There's no phytocannabinoids in the seed. It's in the leaf for marijuana and in the stalk in industrial hemp. So CBD is not strongly psychoactive. I don't want to say it's not psychoactive at all, because it is. It does change thinking. It helps you relax. It helps you to let go of excessive worry. It helps to rebalance the brain so that you eliminate some of the symptoms, especially of anxiety and generalized anxiety disorder. It is the most researched cannabinoid after THC. It's able to influence multiple receptors throughout the body. And in addition to being a phytocannabinoid itself, it also helps to keep your body's own natural endocannabinoids active longer. CBD also has some activity to help reduce inflammation, and it is a great antioxidant. So very healthy compounds. In a study of schizophrenia, they found that 42 patients with schizophrenia who received either CBD or a regular antipsychotic drug for 4 weeks, that the group that received the CBD, their anandamide levels were significantly higher by day 28. In fact, if you look at day 28 in one group, in the control group versus the CBD group, it was a huge difference. I would say almost a 70% difference. CBD treated schizophrenia as effectively as the antipsychotic drug. So in that same study with those same 42 patients with schizophrenia, symptoms were reduced as effectively as the drug group. And this was measured with a standardized assessment scale. And in fact, if you look at the graphical representation, you can see that the CBD reduced symptoms on the same curve, actually even a little bit better than the antipsychotic medication did. Now, antipsychotic drugs may be useful for very short-term interventions. So if you have someone who is out of touch with reality and a danger to themselves and others, and fighting and kicking and biting and screaming, yes, maybe an antipsychotic drug is useful because you can give that short-term to help get that person calmed down. But long-term use of antipsychotic drugs has a whole host of serious adverse effects. And so getting that person transitioned to a more reasonable intervention can have life-changing results. In that study of looking at individuals with schizophrenia, they found that the motor side effects that we find with antipsychotic medications were much higher in the drug treatment group than in the CBD group. The drug treatment group, this is another problem with antipsychotic medications, is they often lead to weight gain. In only 1 month, the treatment group gained an average of 6.5 pounds versus no significant weight gain for the CBD group. So the uses for hemp oil, and when you buy hemp oil in the United States, you should buy full spectrum hemp oil, because even though some of the studies were looking at CBD, recent research by integrative practitioners and university professors, a lot of interest in hemp oil, have found that, remember when I said there's 120 compounds in hemp that are phytocannabinoids, that there's what they call an entourage effect, which means that when you take CBD, you need to have its brothers and sisters along for the ride in order for it to best perform. And so using the full spectrum hemp oil is a much better intervention for all of these disorders versus trying to use a refined CBD. And in fact, there's some legal implications for trying in the dietary supplement world to use like a crystallized CBD or an extracted CBD. The full spectrum hemp oil is, I believe, the more beneficial route. It can be used for people with depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's and other dementias, seizure disorders, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, autism and autism spectrum disorder, chronic pain, cancer, and nausea. A powerful natural medicine. The next natural plant medicine that has excellent human research to back up its efficacy is an extract of all things, echinacea. Now, echinacea, when most people hear about that botanical, they think right away, oh, it's for the immune system. When I think I'm catching a cold or coming down with something, I take echinacea to rev up my immune system. This is not that. The reason I say that is because echinacea, full spectrum echinacea, does indeed rev up your immune system. But researchers in Hungary were looking at what compounds in plants activate the endocannabinoid system. So we know about hemp, right, and all of the plant cannabinoids in hemp. Well, they found in echinacea there's this one single cannabinoid, and it's an alkemide that attaches to the CB1 receptor. It elicits a sense of calm. It helps to reduce that feeling of being overwhelmed. It helps a person feel in better control, gets rid of the excessive sweating, the butterflies in the stomach feeling, all of the things that we associate with daily anxiety without affecting consciousness. This specific plant cannabinoid found in echinacea is not found in any other plant. So this is not a cannabinoid you find in hemp. This is something that is unique unto itself. In an animal study, they did what they call an elevated plus maze. So they put a little mouse in a maze. Mice like to explore. They're looking for food. They're looking for a place to cozy up. Mice like to move around. Well, in 2 of the arms of the maze were completely open, which means that they didn't feel like they had any guardrails on the side, so it made them a little anxious. They wouldn't venture out. So when you look at the patterns of exploration in the lower box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see that when they had walls around them and they felt more safe, like they wouldn't fall off, the little mouse went back and forth and back and forth. But venturing out where there weren't any walls made the mice restrict their movements. After they were treated with this unique compound that's extracted from and concentrated, they found that they equally explored the open arms of the maze as well as the closed arms of the maze, which is an indicator of reductions in fear and anxiety. In a human clinical trial, men and women were given 20 milligrams of this Echinacea angustifolia extract twice a day. They saw by the first day of treatment there was a huge drop in anxiety. By day 3, an even more significant drop. By day 7, almost a 70% plus drop in in anxiety using this Echinacea extract. That's huge because first off, individuals using this that had anxiety saw relief very quickly that continued to improve. After 7 days, they took the individuals off and found that for 2 weeks afterwards, after being treated for only 1 week, for 2 weeks their anxiety did not start to ratchet back up again. But after 2 weeks, unfortunately, it started back up in the other direction. So it's not just a matter of using this unique phytocannabinoid found in Echinacea to reduce anxiety. It's almost like it does a temporary reset of the brain for healthier functionality. Dosage is key because first, you cannot use regular Echinacea. You're not going to get any of the anxiety effect. It might help you prevent a cold or a flu. It's not going to help with anxiety. So it needs to be extracted from the Echinacea and concentrated. The species that is most utilized is called angustifolia because that's richest in this specific alkemide. For most individuals, the dosage is 20 to 480 milligrams twice daily. Sometimes people do need to go up to 3 times daily. You can use it before bedtime. It does not make you sleepy. So if you take it in the daytime, you're not going to fall asleep at the wheel or doze at your desk. But sometimes people that are anxious, the reason that they can't sleep is not because they're not tired, it's because they can't turn the monkey brain off, and it keeps chattering at them about all the things they need to worry about. This helps to alleviate that. So a lot of people love to take a dose about a half hour before bedtime because it helps to quiet that excessive worry so that they can listen to their body's own natural sleep signals. There's no significant adverse effects. You can use it episodically. So let's say that you don't have generalized anxiety disorder or OCD or any of these problems, but you get really nervous if you have to go on an airplane, or you get really tense if you have to do public speaking. Well, this is something that you can take half hour, 45 minutes in advance, and you're going to feel much more relaxed and much more in control. There's no known interactions with prescription anxiolytic medications. We're not aware. It does not intensify those effects. So we believe that it's safe, but I always add the caveat, always check with your healthcare practitioner to make sure that it's right for you, because just because we don't know of and we haven't seen any reported doesn't mean that there's not some specific consideration you should think about. We also have found that it can be used in dogs that have anxiety, dogs that have separation anxiety, thunderstorm anxiety, dogs that get really worked up with firecrackers or loud noises. It's highly effective for them as well. I would be remiss to talk about brain health, but didn't talk about omega-3 fatty acids. They sort of go hand in hand. When we look at yet another aspect of mental health, the 2 omega-3 fatty acids that we find in cold water fish are DHA and EPA, and both play a profound role in how our brain works. They are highly concentrated in the brain, especially the DHA. They reduce inflammation, so if you don't have enough omega-3s on board, guess what? You're going to be more prone to anxiety and depressive disorders because you're going to have more brain inflammation. Some of the symptoms of omega-3 deficiency are mood swings and depression, dry skin and hair, heart problems, fatigue, poor memory, poor circulation. So I think it's crucial for us to consider omega-3 as one of the foundational products that are necessary for rebuilding brain health. A research study showed that people with depression have low levels of omega-3 fatty acids compared to people who don't have depression. In one randomized clinical trial, use of omega-3 fatty acids was associated with a 50% reduction in depressive symptoms. Omega-3s are also, and this is something that's new science, omega-3s are precursors to endocannabinoid formation. And they modulate the connection of the endo and the phytocannabinoids to the receptors. So what that means is, if you have cannabinoid receptors and you have tons and tons and tons of endocannabinoids, maybe you're not deficient at all, but you don't have omega-3s, there's nothing to facilitate that connection, and you're going to have all the symptoms of low endocannabinoid function. Likewise, let's say you decide you're going to take hemp oil because of the 120 plus phytocannabinoids that you want to utilize for anxiety or depression or schizophrenia or whatever issue you're trying to address. And you don't have enough omega-3s, the DHA and the EPA from fish on board, you're going to have less efficacy because they're going to have more trouble connecting to those endocannabinoid receptors. Same thing is true if you are using the alkemide from echinacea that's been clinically studied for anxiety disorder. So that's why I say that these are foundational products for brain health, not just because of the fact that the omega-3s are building blocks for brain cells, not just for the fact that they help to alleviate inflammation, which is a precursor for many mental disorders, but also because they play such a crucial role in the endocannabinoid system as well. So it's awesome if you can eat several servings of cold water fatty fish every single week. Most people do not do that. And additionally, some people are concerned, rightfully so, that we have not been very good stewards of our environment and they are worried about heavy metal or PCB contamination issues, so they limit their exposure to cold water fatty fish, which is a shame. However, there are phospholipid-based bioidentical omega-3 fatty acids from salmon instead of the traditional triglyceride fish oil that have a clinically studied impact on inflammation, and there's also been studies on impact on healthy brain function and anxiety disorders. The reason I like phospholipids better than triglycerides is that in fish oils, the triglycerides are the carriers of the omega-3s, or as I like to say, they're the taxicabs of the omega-3s. And they're not very efficient. They're not very good taxicabs, and they most people don't want more triglycerides in their body. And that's why you have to take so much fish oil to get some kind of omega-3 benefit. Additionally, because of the processing, the omega-3s are twisted. It's like a key that's been twisted. It may still unlock the lock, but you have to fidget around with it a lot more. It's no longer bioidentical. The phospholipids with the omega-3s from salmon, the omega-3s, because of the lack of processing, are in their original bioidentical position, much better utilization and uptake, especially by brain cells. So, in fact, one study showed that DHA in its bioidentical position is taken up and utilized by brain cells 10 times better than DHA that's in its twisted non-bioidentical position. So, additionally, the phospholipids themselves are quite healthy, so you don't have the triglyceride concerns. And because the phospholipids absorb better, you don't have to take quite as high a dosage. So lots of significant reasons why one would choose a more modern method of getting omega-3s on board in the body. Last but certainly not least, one of my favorite natural medicines is curcumin. And the studies on curcumin, especially curcumin in major depressive disorder, are nothing short of amazing. Now, curcumin's been around for a very long time in the form of turmeric. Turmeric is a wonderful plant spice. It's a food, it's a flavoring agent, it's a natural coloring agent. People in India use it to dye cloth. They also use it in certain pastes that they use for religious ceremonies. Turmeric is a very valued and revered plant. And it's a great spice, and if you like the flavor, I hope you eat it every day. I had yellow curry for dinner last night, and it was delicious, and it was very rich in turmeric, and I made sure not to spill it on my white pants because turmeric is a very potent color as well. Inside of turmeric, there's a compound called curcumin. Now, only 2% to 5% of turmeric is curcumin. So turmeric is an awesome food, but it's not much in the natural medicine world being used as a specific medicine to help achieve a specific health intervention. The clinical studies on major depressive disorders are not on turmeric, they're on curcumin. So when I always say that turmeric is a wonderful food and a wonderful spice, but curcumin is the medicine. Standard curcumin is poorly absorbed. There are ways to get it to absorb better. The way that I like best is using turmeric essential oil. The turmeric essential oil provides turmerones that not only boost the absorption of curcumin, but they also help the curcumin be more powerful later because turmerones and turmeric essential oil are not found in curcumin. They're only found in the essential oil. So when you put the two together, you're getting the best of both worlds. In addition to enhanced absorption, curcumin and turmerones, especially AR-turmerone, work in the body together to have more powerful health benefits. I often jokingly say it's like the now and later candy. Do you remember? Is anybody out there old enough to remember now and later? You have the enhanced absorption now, but you get the more profound health benefits later. In a study in experimental models of depression, curcumin has been shown to exhibit significant antidepressant activity, and it's also been found to slightly enhance the activity of the major medications, which are most commonly the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications, and a little bit, although they're not used very much anymore, the MAO inhibitor medications used for depression. They help to restore levels of serotonin and dopamine that are depleted due to chronic stress. A lot of people theorize this because they bring the brain back into balance, and by doing that, it allows for a natural recalibration of the different compounds within the brain that play a role in mood and thinking. In a study using curcumin with turmeric essential oil, the two bounded together on major depressant in a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial looking at the biomarkers that have to do with treatment response and antidepressant mechanisms of changes brought about by different types of medications, they found that curcumin was a major contributor to helping to change some of these biomarkers of depression. In another study looking at the treatment of major depressive disorder, there was also a comparison of curcumin to the prescription drug fluoxetine, that's the generic of Prozac, and they found that by using curcumin with the turmeric essential oil, the dose was 500 milligrams twice a day compared to fluoxetine, that it worked as well as the prescription drug without the major side effects. Another study looked and found that the group of individuals who respond best to curcumin for depression are people that are suffering from something called atypical depression. Now, atypical depression is very resistant to medication making any change whatsoever. So when the person has atypical kinds of depression, which, by the way, they say atypical, it sounds like it's rare, but actually the majority of depressive cases are atypical. Those individuals often do not benefit very much, if at all, from any of the current prescription medication tools that psychiatrists are using. What they found is that they were the best responders to curcumin with turmeric essential oil as far as improving mood and helping to dramatically reduce the symptoms of depression. So lots and lots of promise. One arm of the study showed that it could be used in conjunction with prescription medications, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, without interfering in any way. So there were no adverse drug interactions in that study. The significant results were noted in only 4 to 6 weeks, so not a significant amount of time. It did not interfere with any of the prescription drugs used in the study, and it worked especially well for atypical depression, but it did work for typical depression as well. So why is curcumin so powerful when it comes to depression? Because most people think curcumin, they think arthritis, they think curcumin curcumin cancer, curcumin for liver problems. They don't think curcumin for depression. Well, number one, it's the most potent herbal anti-inflammatory that I've ever encountered. So it just makes sense that by alleviating that brain inflammation, you're going to get improvements in the depressive symptoms. It is also involved in helping to inhibit certain enzymes that degrade neurotransmitters in the brain. So all those feel-good chemicals that your brain automatically and naturally makes, it helps to keep them around a little bit longer. It modulates levels of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine, and it promotes a process called neurogenesis. That just means the creation of new brain cells. Now, many decades ago, scientists believed that the brain did not make any new brain cells, that you were born with a certain number and you never had more than that. But it turns out that the brain does indeed make new brain cells. That process is called neurogenesis, and it's intimately tied to mood. So what they found is that individuals who have profound depression have very little neurogenesis occurring in their brain versus individuals who are functioning normally have normal to above average levels of neurogenesis. The most potent stimulator of new brain cell creation thus far investigated is curcumin, and so it helps individuals to create new brain cells. Now, the natural question after that, and I've been asked this many times, is, well, what about people who've had a stroke? Is it going to help them with creating the new neural pathways they're going to have to develop in order to do a workaround from the damaged areas in the brain? There's not a lot of clinical study in that area yet, but to me it makes perfectly good sense that reducing inflammation and enhancing neurogenesis after a brain trauma like a stroke will result in better and more complete recovery. It also, doesn't it all come back to the cannabinoid system in the body, right? It also stimulates the creation of endocannabinoids in the body. So when we look at things that dramatically influence mental health and well-being, very often we find either a direct or a peripheral tie to the functionality of the endocannabinoid system. So here's a graphical representation of the increase in neuron formation in the hippocampus, the brain associated with memory, the part of the brain associated with memory and learning. And in this study on day 1, you'll notice that the control group, after just one day, they were almost even. On the second day, the curcumin group had about 40-ish% greater activity at creating new brain cells. So it really, in a very short period of time, makes a huge difference in helping with neurogenesis within the brain. So when we look for a recap, when we look at physical factors that contribute to brain and mental dysfunction, hemp oil, the generalized dosages, remember these are estimates, they vary from individual to individual, 50 milligrams up to 3 times a day. And that's a full spectrum hemp oil, not just CBD. Echinacea, alkamide extract, about 20 to 40 milligrams, 2 or 3 times daily. Phospholipid omega-3 from salmon, 2 tablets daily, and that can all be taken at one time. In that case, it doesn't have to be spread out, whereas the others are better if you spread them out a little bit to get a wider type of application. And the curcumin and the turmeric essential oil, 750 milligrams with a dose of 500 milligrams of the pure curcuminoids twice daily can make a real difference to you. You know, in looking over this list, I'm thinking that people that are struggling with a wide variety of mental health concerns can benefit from using 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these kinds of natural medicines to make a real difference in their brain functionality. Now, I did say, promise a little while ago, that I would talk a little bit more about post-traumatic stress disorder because this is a problem that we're starting to see increase, and it makes sense. This is why it's increasing. Post-traumatic stress is increasing because a lot of research is showing that there's a dysfunction within the endocannabinoid system in people that are struggling with this. So post-traumatic stress, let's say that, let's say you were a child and your house burned down and you lost the family pets and everything you owned, and maybe you were even severely injured. So the most traumatic event of your life. Now, some children may bounce back from that and they will always remember it. So when that child's 5 years old, or 10, let's say they're 7 years old, whatever, when they're 17 years old, they will remember the fire. And they may even get a little shiver, like, ooh, that was horrible, or gosh, that was terrible, that was, or maybe a little tear to their eye when they think about the loss of their family pet. When they're 27 years old, of course they will remember it with their brain. But the older they get, the less emotional attachment they'll have to the fact that they had this fire. Now, when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, your brain has not properly dealt with that memory. It was so traumatic that the brain has not undergone its usual process of untangling the intellectual memory from the emotional response. And so when you have post-traumatic stress disorder, if it's 1 year later, 5 years later, 20 years later, when something reminds you of that memory, all of those emotions come rushing back at the same time. So if a child developed post-traumatic stress disorder after that fire, when they're 7 years old, they would be considerably distressed. When they're 17 years old, let's say that they were at a friend's house and they had a bonfire and they didn't know it and they stepped outside and saw the fire, the flames leaping, that activity could bring back an almost crippling amount of fear and anxiety and distress, almost crippling, because it reawakens the emotionality of that memory. When they're 27 years old, that still may be the case because the body has not done its proper job of untangling that horribly traumatic memory from the emotional context. Now, will it always be a sad memory? Yes. Will it always be a memory that where people remember that they had a stressful event? Absolutely. But it doesn't have to be that crippling event. So guess what it is in your brain and in your hippocampus that helps with the detangling of emotions from intellectual memory? You guessed it, it's the endocannabinoid system. So I see enormous promise in using hemp oil in PTSD sufferers. And it makes sense that we're seeing increases in post-traumatic stress disorder because we are seeing, as a society, because of health habits and other things that we're dealing with, a reduction in our natural reserves of endocannabinoids, making people more vulnerable to those types of ongoing chronic stress reactions. So that's just one example about how trying to restore the body to balance can have some pretty amazing benefits for people. Anybody look familiar? Beyonce, Robin Williams, Carrie Fisher, Abraham Lincoln, J.K. Rowling. Well, these are some individuals who have been forthright about their mental health disorders. Carrie Fisher had bipolar disorder. J.K. Rowling had a debilitating depression. When we look at Robin Williams, it turned out the poor man, in addition to his depression, had a neurological disease of the brain that was causing a deterioration that led to some very dysfunctional mood. Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones. Harrison Ford, Han Solo, who is, this big tough guy up on the screen, has also suffered with crippling depression. So these are just a small group of individuals who have tried to step forward, aside from Abraham Lincoln, who have tried to be honest about what they struggle with in order to help others understand their own struggles with anxiety and depression, that it should not be a stigma. Of course, saying it should not be a stigma doesn't make it so. People still have trouble understanding mental disability and mental illness because they see it as a character flaw or a weakness. They don't see it if you have Parkinson's disease or if you have eczema, they don't see it as a weakness, they see it as a disease. They see it as a physical problem. Well, the same thing should be true of mental issues as well. So people with depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses often feel very alone. And sometimes the disease itself isolates them from other people. They have more difficulty reaching out. Maybe they have a social anxiety disorder. They can't even bear to be around a large group of people until their anxiety is under control. A lot of these folks can feel very pessimistic about their future. And our society stigmatizes brain disorders. But I just want you to know that this is a fight that can be won, that these are things that we can do, that we can make real differences in how the brain works. We can make real differences in restoring the brain to balance and seeing a dramatic improvement in all of these symptoms.